Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. This video we're going to talk about a forecast for 2022, and we're going to take kind of a big picture approach and just look at a couple of the major themes that are going to emerge for us astrologically here in the coming year in 2022. And we're going to focus on a couple of things. The first is going to be the transit of Jupiter into Pisces. After spending most of the year of 2021 in Aquarius, we're going to have a major shift in tone as the great benefic moves into the planet of watery, emotional, mutable Pisces. The other thing that's happening is the lunar nodes are going to be shifting signs. We've been dealing with the nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius for the past 18 months, and now later in this month we're going to see the nodes shift back into Scorpio and Taurus, and that's going to be a really, I think, major tonal shift for 2021 as we move from the mutability of the fire and air signs of Gemini and Sag into the fixed water and earth signs of Scorpio and Taurus. So we'll take a look at that. A couple other things to note. All of the Mercury retrogrades this year are going to be starting in air signs and retrograding back into the earth signs before moving forward again. So there's another theme. I like to look at an elemental level what's happening here. So air and earth, right? That's kind of the theme of Mercury retrogrades. And we also have the nodes moving from fire and air to water and earth. Right? We have Jupiter moving from an air sign, Aquarius, into a water sign, Pisces. So this move of an elemental level from the masculine, proactive fire and air signs into the feminine, reactive earth and water signs. Right? So where fire and air tends to be more levitational, those two elements tend to move upward and outward, right? Water and earth are gravitational. They tend to move downwards and inwards. So those are a couple of major themes. And then we're also going to look at Mars contacts with all of the outer planets. And we'll see when we pull up the chart that Mars is going to make a conjunction to every of the outer planets in succession over the course of the first half of the year, culminating with what I think will be a pretty intense meeting with Uranus in, I think in August, I believe, of this year. We'll take a look closer at that. So let's pull up the chart and take a look. One of the things I like to do when I'm doing like these big picture analysis for like a year ahead of time is I usually will just look at the planets from Mars outward. I take out the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus, the faster moving planets. So what I'm looking for are like the big, significant aspects that are forming between the major planets over the course of the year. Then, of course, all the faster moving planets will add emphasis to all those configurations. But what we want to see is like what's popping out in terms of the aspects and as the planets are making different angles throughout the course of the year. And two of the things that we want to focus on for 2022 are prevalent here at the very beginning of the year, right? We were going to talk about Jupiter having moved into the sign of Pisces. We see it here at 0 degrees. And I also want to look at the nodal axis. And right now it's at 1 degrees. But as we know, the nodes move retrograde, right? So they're going to move backwards into Taurus and Scorpio, respectively. In a couple of weeks, we'll see that change. So really we're starting the year with sort of the last chance to really get in touch with what this nodal message has been all about for the last year and a half. We've talked a lot about it over the course of the past year, right? Because we had Saturn in a very harmonious aspect to the nodes throughout all of 2021, which really gave us an opportunity to really get practically grounded in that axis, that Gemini-Sag axis. And what we've been getting is the message of the South Node, which is the past, right? With Sagittarius, we've been getting the opportunity to go back into the past, whether it's our personal past, our cultural past, our collective past, looking for older ideas, old wisdom, old ways of knowing and being in the world, and to bring them forward into the future here, and to express them in the future through the North Node in Gemini, which is sort of articulating our vision for the future. And so that's been very present. And I think if you've had those kinds of experiences, you're on track with this transition. But what's going to happen as they move and change signs, very different energy. And anytime we get a planetary configuration that will aspect these nodes for the rest of the year, it's going to trigger a much different response, right? So we'll see as we, let me just move the chart forward to show you, by the time we get into the end of January, we see the nodes have already moved back into Taurus and Scorpio. And right away we see they're going to have this aspect with Pluto, for instance, similar to the way we had the trine aspect with Saturn all in 2021. Now we've got Pluto involved, right? And this will be a shorter lasting effect, maybe a couple of weeks from when they sort of start and come into exact and go out. That we have like a 5-degree orb on either side, but here we get the intensity of Pluto and Capricorn now hitting the earth signs. We get 2 earth signs, right, where we had Saturn and Aquarius and the north node in Gemini, 2 air signs, right? We were getting ideas, right? It was very mentally stimulating. Well, now this becomes earthy, it's physical, it's embodied. We're gonna really be called to some sort of action. And I think we'll talk about this, but the whole theme of the next year and a half with regard to the nodal axis is we're uncovering past emotional, in ways, emotional wounding, emotional trauma, emotional baggage. We're going to have to do some real shadow work over the course of this year, because that's what Scorpio is all about. And so when we consider the South Node in Scorpio, we're looking into the past emotional wounds or traumas or insecurities and fears. Those are all going to be coming up for us individually and, of course, collectively. So we're going to see a lot of that shadow coming out. But what we want to try to do is, if we can face our fears, face the demons, do the work of going deep and doing the therapeutic work that might need to be done, the healing, releasing the traumas, releasing the past that's holding us back, well, we get this sort of spiritual rebirth from that process. And it's the alchemy of the South Node in Scorpio. And that's what we want to be able to do. And every time we get one of these contacts with the outer planets, certainly this first one here with Pluto is going to be very intense, right? Because Pluto sort of is the ruler of Scorpio. So this aspect is really bringing out some sort of practical, think about Capricorn, right? A practical transformation of our emotional composition, if you will, right? Think about what that Scorpio South Node is doing. What is the trauma? And trauma, can be it's a charged word, right? There's many levels of trauma. But we all carry some emotional trauma from early childhood, from old relationships, and we can even see the trauma that gets carried over from lifetime to lifetime. We can have past life karma and past life trauma that gets triggered by these kinds of constellations. So it's going to be a much more sensitive, emotionally sensitive, and emotionally charged period than we had even coming out of 2021. Because we need to really process the trauma, the collective trauma. Certainly what we've all gone through in the last 2 years, right? I think there's going to be a lot more deeper processing of all of that, all the challenges that we've made and faced in the last couple of years. So that's going on. But I want to just bring up some of the some graphics just to sort of illustrate these points. The first thing we'll talk about is I did talk about, Jupiter had been in Aquarius here for most of 2021, right? And we had this very expansive, powerful energy of Jupiter moving through the very progressive, egalitarian, scientifically minded, technologically focused sign of Aquarius. And of course, we've talked about it a little bit in past videos, but I think we could see this archetypal complex correlating pretty nicely with the vaccines, right? what did we have? We had a massive global effort, Jupiter, massive global, to roll out some cutting edge medical technology, right? Aquarius, and do it on this sort of massive and unprecedented scale, right? So that whole effort has this really strong Jupiter in Aquarius tone to it. And so they line up pretty nicely. Now it's going to be interesting as we track Jupiter moving through Pisces, and it's going to give us an entirely different sort of quality to the Jupiter energy, right? So all of that expansive, generous, fortunate, optimistic, growth-oriented energy now moves into Pisces, right? So it's going from fixed air into mutable water. It's going from a scientific mind to a spiritual mind, right? It's going from sort of precision and sort of technology to a much more nebulous and oceanic and much less defined type of energy. Now, of course, Jupiter is in its domicile in Pisces. It's the traditional ruler of the sign. So this is actually the best position for Pisces. I mean, actually, this is the best position for Jupiter since it went through Sagittarius back in 2017 and 18. So this bodes well, really, for the year in terms of what Jupiter portends, right? It can really bring its gifts. It's the great benefic, right? It gives opportunity, it gives fortune, it gives good luck. It's generous, it's usually happy and buoyant. It's an uplifting energy. And as it moves through Pisces, well, now we've got it combined with that compassionate, loving, kindness, gentleness, the sense of oneness and connection to all that is, right? If we look at some of these qualities within Pisces, you can really see how this could really bode well, right? You could have sort of this truth-seeking into the transcendental, right? You can have an expansive sense of oneness, love, and kindness, right? We could be very growth-oriented in terms of our spiritual or soulful or collective endeavors. Now, of course, we always point out that the shadow side of both of these archetypes could also be present with this configuration. So what that might look like? You could get a sort of an overindulgence, a vacillating, and a sense of confusion, right? You can have, a overly sensitive type of situation, right? Where everyone just overreacts. Everyone gets a little delusional, right? You can have this sense of, being lost in fantasy, not knowing the truth. So you've got this Jupiter energy that wants to seek truth, but sometimes the truth can get confused in Pisces. It's just nebulous. It's not clear. We can get mixed messages. So this is something that we want to be, sort of on alert for as Jupiter makes its transit of the sign of Pisces throughout most of the year. It's going to start really quickly. It moves very fast for the first 3 or 4 months. Goes through almost all. It's going to go through all of Pisces and dip its toes into Aries, and then retrograde back and finish the year out in Pisces. So that's a major theme. The other thing we can look at in terms of the nodal axis, right? We talked about this where we have the nodes that were in Gemini and Sagittarius, right? North node Gemini, south node Sag. This is what we talked about, fire and air, and both are very mutable signs, right? So it was very focused on idealism, right? Think about Sagittarius, this pursuit of knowledge, of philosophy, of really trying to create a worldview. And I think 2021 was all about, we got our worldviews upended in a lot of ways, and we were trying to reclaim our footing in a way. And that Sagittarius South Node was helping with that. It's also bringing up some challenges too. There's also parts of our past that we need to let go of. But now what's happening with 2022 is we're changing into the signs of Scorpio and Taurus. And we just see a very different archetypal complex here when we consider these two sign pairs, right? You have Scorpio, fixed water, that desire nature. It's ruled by Pluto, right? And it's just all about this depth. It's all about, it's an obsessive, compulsive type of energy. It's really wants to get into the depth of the emotional intensity. issues of trauma, right? Sex, but also spiritual mastery. It's all about transformation. We go through, Scorpio is kind of the agony and the ecstasy, right? Exploring the depths, going beyond taboo to get to the deepest truths, the deepest emotional truths. And then Taurus, the fixed earth sign, really, this is really all about self-reliance, and it's about material well-being. It's also possessive. You see, that's a characteristic of both of these fixed signs. And it's really about sex. It's about the physical act of sex, procreation, as a means of survival. Survival of our species depends on sexual reproduction, where Scorpio is more of an emotional sexual energy. But together, these are really about power and control. Like, they really want to be empowered. And so this is going to be a major theme for us when these nodal axis is going to get triggered by all of these outer planets at some point during the year, right? So our first one is this trine and sextile, which is a really harmonious relationship, which is a good thing because, Pluto's aspects can be challenging. And I think we're still in this Pluto Capricorn era, which will continue till 2024. We're still working through that massive transformation of our entire social order. The structure of the world is coming under intense pressure. And these last 2 years will be really telling, I think, of this entire Pluto and Capricorn period that began back in 2008 with the financial crisis, right? The global financial crisis. So a lot of that is still unresolved in a lot of ways. So it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be a very challenging, next 2 or 3 years. As Pluto changes signs, then Neptune changes signs, and Uranus, all the 3 outer planets changing signs within about a 15-month period from 2024, 25, 26. So, but we're setting up for that right now. So back to the charts here. There's a few other things. The Saturn Uranus square. We've had all 3 exact squares in 2021, but even into 2022, those are still going to be within aspect. Right? Saturn will start separating from Uranus, but there'll be a period even as late as August of 2022 where they're still in aspect, and this energy is still in play for 2022. We describe this as being the clash of the titans, right? This is 2 opposing forces that really work in tandem to really structure society, where Uranus is constantly liberating and trying to create freedom from Saturn's restriction and limits and borders and boundaries. And of course, this was in play really, in terms of social restrictions versus personal freedom. And I think the theme will continue through 2022. Just talked about Pluto and Capricorn. That's an ongoing dynamic that we'll continue to explore and experience. And the first trip will be when we get Mars coming in to conjoin Pluto. We can see that's going to happen, I want to say, somewhere in the end of February, early March. We'll see that we're going to get Mars conjoined Pluto. They'll be in aspect to the nodal axis, which of course will, I said, be in Scorpio and Taurus by then. So this is a much different tone than we were dealing with in 2021 when we were dealing with the nodes. I feel like it's going to be much more, we're going to feel it. It's going to be embodied. And it's going to require action, right? We think about this, we have Mars empowering Pluto, and if you think about what those 2 planets bring to the table, I mean, Pluto's already intense. It's sexual, it's powerful, it's unconscious, right? It's strong desire nature, it's the unconscious desires of the soul. And then Mars comes and just empowers it, right? It adds a degree of aggression, it adds potency, it adds an impulse to initiate, to really be, as it says, assertive, physical, action-oriented. Both of these have an undercurrent of violence to them. You see this lust, this sexual intensity and violence. So this could be a particularly sort of charged period for us as we consider, moving into this configuration and hitting that nodal axis. Okay, so what is going to come up? We talked about the wounding, right? The spiritual or the emotional wounding that we may have experienced, the past, the shadow, right? And all of this is occurring during what's we possibly known as, I should say popularly known as the United States Pluto return. And I'm going to do a whole video on this in the next few weeks because it's worth taking a deeper dive on. But essentially Pluto is coming back around to where it was on July 4th, 1776, during the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So if you consider the United States' chart, the birth chart of the nation, the United States has Pluto in Capricorn in its natal chart. And so now we have Pluto coming back around. It's a 248-year cycle. And of course, as individuals, we never have a Pluto return. No one lives 248 years. But nations can have those, companies, nations, other entities that we can also do charts for. And it's really going to be, interesting. And it's not that, something specific will happen, in late February, early March. We've been in aspect, right? We've been in orb of this aspect for a year or two. Actually, probably 3 years now. It's probably 2 or 3 years on either side of the exact conjunction. But it's a very significant time. It's the first Pluto return of the United States. And you can just see what's sort of constellated here, right? Intense willpower, regenerative efforts, with courage and resolve, one of the best combinations of those two energies. A volcanic catharsis, sexual dynamism, right? But on the shadower side of this complex, right, you get brute force and ruthlessness, predatory aggression, the notion of like pushing too hard, and sexual aggression. I think there's like a violent undertone. So we want to be really aware of what's going on with ourselves and in society and in the culture during that transit, because that's going to be pretty significant. If we move forward, we'll just see how Mars keeps moving across here, and its next encounter is with Saturn sometime in early April. Right, so from late March to early April. Now that Mars energy is charging and combining with Saturn. Okay, well, what is that going to signify? Well, now we'll see, that aggressive impulsiveness of Mars coming into contact with the difficulty and challenge and limits and that sort of sobering, conservative energy of Saturn. Right, so not quite as, it doesn't quite have the same affinity with Saturn as Mars did with Pluto, but this creates a little bit of a different dynamic. The idea of disciplined action, right? That discipline of Saturn combined with the action and drive of Mars, right? It's an opportunity to test our mettle, right? We'll have more power and ability to confront challenges, right? Because Saturn brings challenges and Mars brings energy, so that makes sense. There's a dynamic tension with these two planets, but a capacity for completion, right? Saturn insists that we work hard, put our nose to the grindstone, and get it done. And with that Mars energy, we'll have the ability to do difficult things and to complete and finish things, projects that we've already had in progress. This will be a great time to, close the books on that, so to speak. But of course, we also have the less desirable aspects of these two planets when they combined. It's fear-driven action, right? We're motivated more by fear than by courage. Our energies can get frustrated, right? That Mars energy and the desire to just go out there and do and express can get frustrated. I've got a typo there. Frustrated. But yeah, that's very frustrating, right? You get frustrated by the Saturn energy of limit and restriction and boundary and repression, rules and regulations. Mars can get bottled up in that kind of energy. It can have the potential of inflaming old problems, right? Saturn represents the old wounds and the old issues, and then Mars comes in and just kind of pokes, peels off the scab of that old wound. Boundary collisions, right? And we could see this playing out. This is a classic sort of symbol for sort of military action, aggression between countries. You think about what's potentially happening in Russia. That might be something that erupts later this year under this constellation. Vindictive rage. So some pretty unflattering and difficult energies to deal with. And then you see that concurrently, again, now we get a square to the nodal axis, right? Now where Saturn was in trine aspect or in a more harmonious aspect to the nodes when they were back in Gemini and Sag, now that they're moving into Scorpio and Taurus, it's a square aspect. So this is going to be a much different energy to negotiate, where that same Saturn challenge, difficulty, restriction, repression now is grinding with these signs, because that air now conflicts with the earth and the water, right? So particularly in squaring both of them, this is a much different tone. And this is one of the things, we'll talk about this a lot over 2022, and we'll get into specifics when we look at all the planets in the monthly forecast, but this is one to watch out for. And this will particularly be a very sensitive time. It seems to me that early April, late March, early April, this square is going to get triggered pretty intensely. Then we'll just track Mars as it moves forward, and the next contact will be with Neptune in Pisces sometime mid-May, right? And so here it's going to be in trine with that Pluto, or in sextile with Pluto, sextile the nodes, trine the south node. But again, if we want to look at what that energy might look like, Mars in Neptune. Again, aggression, action, energy. But now it's going into this nebulous oceanic oneness of Neptune, right? A much more diffuse and mystic energy, right? So what might this look like? Well, you get spiritual vitality, right? You get the sense of magnetic charisma, right? The spiritual power. This is the power of the charismatic preacher, right? Mars, Neptune. Compassionate action, another typo. I put this together really quickly this morning, so I apologize for the typos here. But flexible resilience, the ability to go with the flow. It's a classic Mars-Neptune quality, right? Because Mars wants to go, but Neptune insists we flow. So if we can go with the flow states are very Mars-Neptune. But then again, you've got the shadow side, always ever present. A demoralizing futility, the unfocused willpower, right? Everything gets diffused, nothing's clear, nothing's focused, get kind of lost in that energy. Ego trips could be manifested by this. The notion of false healing powers, right? We might get that sort of charismatic preacher, but is also the snake oil salesman. That's a Mars-Neptune configuration. Creepy desires, and I'll just let your mind wander with what that might entail. So, we also will come in very quickly. We see that by the time we get into May, Jupiter has already moved through Pisces entirely and is now already dipping its toes into Aries. Again, another very interesting preview that we'll get. This is going to be the tone of 2023, but here in mid-2022, we're going to see, well, what is that going to be like? And this will be a really good test of that energy. Mars, Jupiter, in Aries together, right? So what might that entail? Well, energy for expansion, right? An assertive optimism, this like potent, generous, worldly capacity, right? Exuberant energy. Jupiter, Mars. Wholesome confidence, right? that uplifting buoyancy of Jupiter bringing that Mars energy to be, more powerful and more positive in its expression. Fortunate actions, right? Again, Jupiter, Mars. Great accomplishments, right? That power to get things done, coupled with Jupiter's capacity for big initiatives. Major breakthroughs happen under the influence of Mars and Jupiter. A rather positive synergy. But on the downside, self-aggrandizement, right? Obnoxious theatrics, philosophical extremism, waste and excess, nationalism and expansionism. So this kind of aggression on a global scale is also something that we want to work out for within ourselves, but also within the collective, and tends to play out, in political spheres. This will be an interesting time. We're going through midterms in the United States, another which should be a rather contentious election cycle. I imagine this configuration will be an interesting time during the primaries for midterms. And then I want to cruise through it. It's going to be a while. The next major aspect that Mars makes is with Uranus and Taurus. And this one you can see sets up to be really the most complex configuration here that we've addressed so far. So we're going to get Mars and Uranus together. And this is intense. This is a revolutionary type of energy. That independent, aggressive nature of Mars, that assertive, physical, action-oriented, merging with the revolutionary and rebellious nature of Uranus, right? This urge for liberation. It can be radical. It can be eccentric energies, right? This phrase I love that describes this combination: electric yang enthusiasm. I just love that concept. I mean, it really says it all. Adventure and speed, decisive courage, sudden breakthroughs, right? This is another very innovative configuration. Erotic emancipation. Mars is connected with our desire nature, right? And Uranus is the need to liberate or emancipate. So our eros, our erotic nature gets liberated, emancipated under this signature. Conversely, we can have excessive self-will. We can have reckless audacity, impulsive, rash action. Sudden military strikes could take place under this configuration. And an unfettered sexuality, right? You can see how erotic emancipation has sort of a positive sort of aspect to it, but this can be negative. It can be sudden and violent in our sexuality as well. So we want to be, sort of on guard against that. But not only is that conjunction happening between those two planets, they're exactly conjunct with the North Node at that time. So again, this future-oriented pointing towards the physical, pointing towards the natural. I think one of the things that this North Node transit of Taurus is going to constellate, it's really going to bring environmental issues to the forefront. A lot of these, natural disasters, the wildfires, the floods, this crazy weather we've been having, is really going to intensify. And I feel like this period is where we really are going to get a wake-up call from Mother Nature, from our connection to the planet, as the source, as our home for survival, for self-preservation, Taurus, right? Our very bodies, we're going to really feel a resonance in our connection to the earth, the environment, as being necessary for our survival. Resources, food and water are really going to become very important issues over the next 18 months. And this will be a real trigger, right? We're talking, it's like July 31st. It's an exact conjunction, triple conjunction, Mars, Uranus, North Node, right? Square Saturn. This is, and as I said, that Saturn-Uranus square, even though they're separating, they're about 4 degrees apart at this time, so not exact, but still in effect. And this could be the last great hurrah of that clash of the Titans, that repressive energy of Saturn being resisted by this liberating energy of Uranus, and having Mars there with it. This could be some kind of explosive breakthrough could take place under this influence, right? As we said, the archetypal configuration is there. We can predict it archetypally. We can't say what event will happen, but we can get a sense of the types of events that are likely to occur under this influence. And we can see them historically. This is the kinds of energies that have played out, the kinds of events that characterize these very challenging aspects between these difficult planets, right? Saturn involved. So, that T-square will be very interesting. I think that was really, that's kind of the last slide I had. And that really covers, I think those are the major pieces that I'll be looking at all year long in my monthly forecast. So, that Jupiter in Pisces, those Mars aspects with all the outer planets, and how they're aspecting the nodal axis. But in general, I think, there's always reasons to be either optimistic or terrified by all these events and what is possible from these configurations. But for me, the big theme, especially with Jupiter and Pisces, I think I did a video or wrote an article earlier this year about, to me, it's big love. The idea of Jupiter, that grand expression, is generous. It just wants to really share the gifts. And in Pisces, it's the most love-filled, compassionate, kind, gentle sign of the zodiac. So it brings up to mind, to me, it's the Greek notion of agape, right? That love, unconditional, unselfish love of all others, right? And it has its parallel in the Buddhist tradition called metta, which is, unconditional, universal love for all sentient beings. And I've been thinking about that virtue of metta. We talk a lot this year, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more in 2022, this notion of the metaverse, right? Even Facebook recently getting in on the game, and I think they changed the name of their, corporate owner to Meta. But it makes me wonder if we shouldn't really be focusing on a different kind of meta, right? The Buddhist concept of metta, universal, unconditional love for everyone. Wouldn't that be a great virtual space to interact with, right? Imagine if what they created was that sort of atmosphere versus the, contentious and divided atmosphere that a lot of our social media tends to promote, shall we say, these days. So, as always, I like to remind us, it's up to us how we work with these energies, right? What astrology can show us is here's what's present. Here's the energy patterns that are being configured. But whatever we bring to them, it's our own individual will. How we tend to align with these energies determines how the archetype gets evolved, right? And it's what I've always loved about this archetypal approach, the whole concept, right? These archetypes are eternal, yet ever-changing. It's a really interesting thing to think about, right? They've always been, right? We think about something like the archetype of Saturn, right? There's always going to be this energy of burden and responsibility and limits and rules and regulations. But over time, that archetype is evolving. As we all engage with it, it changes, it morphs, it still retains its character, but every time someone expresses or works with Saturn and that energy, that archetype shifts, that archetype morphs, that archetype evolves. So when we all can collectively evolve archetypes and to sort of move towards their highest expression, I think that's when we can do good in our lives, for ourselves, in our relationships, in our community, and in the world. And that's the kind of thing that I'm always lobbying for, if you will. So that's kind of my take on it. Anyway, that's a preview of some of the things we'll be looking at throughout the year. Like I said, we'll do a lot more deeper dives in each of the monthly forecasts as these configurations start to manifest. But just wanted to give you a sort of look ahead at what you can expect and sort of an idea of the astrological weather for 2022. All right. Well, I hope that's been helpful for you. I look forward to connecting with you throughout the year. And again, Happy New Year. Till next time. Satnam.